On a cold Tuesday evening in November, Marcus sat alone at his kitchen table, mechanically spooning soup into his mouth, while the silence of his empty apartment pressed against him like a weight. The loneliness had become his constant companion. Since Sarah left 3 months ago, taking with her the laughter that once filled these rooms, the gentle hum of shared conversations, and the warm sense of purpose that came from caring for someone who cared for you in return. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, hollow-eyed, shoulders slumped, a man who had forgotten what it felt like to matter to another living being. The sound came softly at first, almost lost beneath the whistle of wind through the building's old walls. A faint scratching, followed by the most pitiful mewing Marcus had ever heard. He paused, spoon halfway to his lips, listening. There it was again, desperate, pleading, tugging at something deep in his chest that had been dormant for too long. Marcus pushed back from the table and walked to his apartment door, his sock-covered feet silent on the hardwood floor. The mewing grew louder as he approached, and when he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. Huddled against the wall in the dimly lit hallway was the smallest, most bedraggled cat he had ever seen. Its orange and white fur was matted and dirty, its ribs clearly visible beneath the thin coat. But it was the cat's eyes that stopped Marcus cold, large, green, and filled with a desperate hope that seemed to say, "Please, I have nowhere else to go." The cat looked up at him and released another plaintive cry, and Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. Here was a creature even more alone than he was, even more in need of kindness. Without thinking, he crouched down and extended his hand. The cat sniffed cautiously, then pressed its tiny head against his palm, purring so loudly it seemed impossible such a small body could contain such a big sound. "Well, hello there," Marcus whispered, his voice rusty from disuse. "You look like you could use a friend." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in the all-night convenience store 3 blocks away, standing in front of a wall of pet supplies he had never noticed before. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he studied the bewildering array of cat food options, his heart beating faster than it had in months. The elderly clerk, Mrs. Patterson, watched him with knowing eyes. "First-time cat owner?" she asked with a gentle smile. I'm not sure I'm a cat owner at all," Marcus admitted, running his hand through his hair. "There's this cat outside my apartment, and it looks so hungry, and I just—" He trailed off, feeling foolish. "You just wanted to help," Mrs. Patterson finished for him. "That's how it starts for most of us." She came around the counter and selected a can of premium cat food and a small bag of dry food. "Start with these, and you'll need a bowl, actually 2 bowls. One for food, one for water." As Marcus walked back through the cold night air, plastic bag in hand, he realized he felt lighter than he had in weeks. There was someone waiting for him now, someone who needed him. The thought both terrified and thrilled him. The cat was still there when he returned, now sitting primly by his door as if it had never doubted he would come back. Marcus unlocked his apartment and held the door open. The cat looked at him questioningly. "Come on," Marcus said softly. "It's warm inside." The cat stepped delicately across the threshold, then sat in the middle of Marcus's living room, looking around with wide eyes. Marcus went to the kitchen and opened the can of food, the rich smell filling the air. He spooned it into one of his own bowls. He would buy proper cat bowls tomorrow, and filled another with water. When he set the bowls down, the cat approached cautiously, sniffed once, then began eating with desperate intensity. Marcus watched, feeling his throat tighten. How long had it been since this little creature had eaten? How many cold nights had it spent alone, searching for scraps, for shelter, for someone to care? "Take it easy," Marcus murmured, settling onto the floor a few feet away. "There's plenty more where that came from." The cat paused in its eating to look at him, as if checking to make sure this wasn't some cruel dream, then returned to the bowl. When it had finished every morsel, it sat back and began methodically cleaning its face with its paw. Then, to Marcus's amazement, it walked directly to him and climbed into his lap. Marcus had never been a cat person. He'd always considered himself more of a dog person, if anything, though he'd never owned any pets. But as this small, warm weight settled against him and began purring like a tiny motor, something fundamental shifted inside him. The constant ache of loneliness that had lived in his chest began to ease, replaced by something he had almost forgotten existed, the feeling of being needed, of mattering to another living being. "I guess you're staying," he whispered, gently stroking the cat's matted fur. "We'll have to get you cleaned up, and you'll need a name." Over the following days, Marcus threw himself into cat ownership with an enthusiasm that surprised him. He researched cat care online, bought proper food and water bowls, a litter box, toys, and a soft bed. He made an appointment at the veterinary clinic for a checkup and vaccinations. Most importantly, he spent hours gently brushing out the mats in the cat's fur, revealing a beautiful orange and white coat underneath. He named the cat Oliver, after the orphan who asked for more. It seemed fitting. The transformation wasn't just in Oliver. Marcus found himself waking up each morning with purpose. He had someone to feed, someone to check on, someone who greeted him at the door each evening with enthusiastic purring and head bumps. His apartment, which had felt like a tomb for months, began to feel like a home again. Oliver was an affectionate cat, seeming to sense that Marcus needed companionship as much as he did. He would curl up on Marcus's lap while he watched television, sleep at the foot of his bed, and follow him around the apartment like a small, furry shadow. When Marcus worked from home, Oliver would settle on the desk beside his computer, occasionally walking across the keyboard to remind Marcus that he was there. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most, the mornings when Marcus would wake, to find Oliver sitting by the window watching the sunrise, and Marcus would join him with his coffee. The evenings when they would sit together on the couch, Oliver purring contentedly while Marcus read or watched the news. These simple moments of shared peace filled the holes in Marcus's heart that he hadn't even realized were there. 3 weeks after finding Oliver, Marcus was at his local coffee shop when he overheard 2 women talking at the next table. "I still can't believe someone just abandoned those cats," one was saying. 6 of them left in a cardboard box behind the grocery store. Thank God the animal shelter took them in. Marcus's blood ran cold. He turned slightly in his chair. "Excuse me," he said to the women. "Did you say 6 cats were abandoned?" "Yes." "Just terrible," the first woman replied. "Last month someone left a whole litter in a box. The shelter said they were all malnourished and scared. They've been trying to find homes for them ever since." Marcus felt his heart sink into his stomach. Oliver hadn't been a lone stray. He had been one of 6 abandoned kittens. While Oliver had found warmth and safety, 5 other cats were still waiting for homes, still hoping for someone to care. That afternoon, Marcus found himself at the animal shelter, his heart pounding as he explained his situation to the volunteer at the front desk. "You found one of the box cats?" the young woman asked, her face lighting up. "Oh, that's wonderful. We've been so worried about them. Can I ask which one?" Marcus described Oliver, and the volunteer led him to the back of the shelter. There, in a row of cages, were 5 cats that looked remarkably similar to Oliver, orange and white, with the same large green eyes, the same hopeful expressions. "They're doing much better now," the volunteer explained, "but they're still looking for forever homes. It's harder to place older kittens, and being strays makes it even more difficult. People prefer younger cats or purebreds." Marcus stood in front of the cages, looking at these 5 faces that could have been Oliver's. One small tabby pressed against the bars, mewing softly. Another, a calico, reached a paw through the cage toward him. They all looked at him with the same desperate hope he had seen in Oliver's eyes that first night. "I can't take all 5, Marcus said quietly. "My apartment is too small, and I work full-time." "Of course," the volunteer said kindly. "Even taking one was wonderful. Maybe you could spread the word? Sometimes the best advocates for shelter animals are people who've experienced the joy of rescue themselves." Marcus nodded, but as he drove home, he couldn't stop thinking about those 5 faces. Oliver greeted him at the door as always, purring and weaving between his legs. As Marcus picked him up and felt the warm weight of contentment in his arms, he thought about Oliver's siblings, still waiting in their cages for someone to choose them. That evening, Marcus called his sister Emma, whom he hadn't spoken to in months. "Marcus!" Emma's voice was surprised but pleased. "I was just thinking about you. How are you doing?" For the first time in a long time, Marcus could honestly say, "I'm doing well, really well, but I need your help with something." He told her about Oliver, about the shelter, about the 5 cats still waiting for homes. Emma listened without interruption, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she said finally, "Jim and I have been talking about getting a pet for the kids. They've been asking for a dog, but maybe a cat would be better to start with. And it sounds like these cats really need homes." By the end of the week, Emma and her family had adopted one of Oliver's siblings, a playful orange tabby they named Sunny. Marcus's co-worker Janet, inspired by his stories about Oliver, visited the shelter and fell in love with the calico. One by one, through Marcus's gentle advocacy and the simple power of sharing his story, Oliver's siblings found their forever homes. The last to be adopted was the smallest of the group, a quiet orange and white cat, who looked the most like Oliver. An elderly widower named Frank came to the shelter looking for a companion and left with what he declared was the perfect cat for a fellow who appreciates the quiet life. On a warm Saturday morning in December, exactly 2 months after finding Oliver, Marcus sat in his living room with his cat curled in his lap, reading the newspaper. The apartment was filled with sunlight, and Oliver's purring provided a gentle soundtrack to the peaceful morning. Marcus's coffee grew cold as he stroked Oliver's fur and marveled at how completely his life had changed. He had set out to feed a hungry cat, but Oliver had fed something in him that had been starving, his need to care for another living being, his capacity for love, his sense of purpose. In rescuing Oliver, Marcus had somehow rescued himself.